Your brain is the hardware of your soul. It is the hardware of your very essence as a human being. You cannot be who you really want to be unless your brain works right. How your brain works determines how happy you are, how effective you feel, and how well you interact with others. Your brain patterns help you or hurts you with your marriage, parenting skills, work, and religious beliefs, along with your experiences of pleasure and pain. If you're anxious, depressed, obsessive, compulsive, prone to anger, or distracted, you probably believe these problems are all in your head. In other words, you believe your problem is purely physiological or psychological. However, research that Dr. Amen, the writer of this and others have done, shows that the problems are related to the physiology of the human brain. And the good news is that we have proof that you can change that physiology and you can fix what's wrong for many problems.
It's timely, it's insightful, it's motivating, it's empowering. It's Time with Fred, your inspirational broadcast with host Fred Gaddy.
So thanks for tuning in to the Time with Fred podcast. This is a podcast that challenges paradigms and mindsets that hold us back. With me to discuss this very important topic is Dr. Jay Faber. Dr. Faber is a clinical and forensic psychiatrist with more than 2 decades of experience in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry and pharmacological management, treating patients in clinical private practices in Colorado, California, and Georgia. Currently, he is on the medical staff at the Amen Clinics in Costa Mesa, California. He's also a member of the American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Dr. Faber, thanks for coming on the Time with Fred podcast today.
Thank you, Fred, for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. So, Dr. Faber, one of the things that really got me interested in this book was the title. I mean, we've learned and heard about some of the functions of the brain and what it can do. But you wrote a book. The title of the book is Escape, Rehab Your Brain to Stay Out of the Legal System. And that's really what piqued my interest. So why such a title, Dr. Faber?
Well, I mean, I got all sorts of suggestions, and I thought if there was a title that would provoke curiosity, the word escape would certainly do it. It has certainly received positive connotations, but also not so positive connotations, which is okay. The big key is the second half about rehabbing your brain.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how provocative that would be, which might draw some of the pundits, but it was very interesting. I mean, reading excerpts from your book, I haven't read the whole thing, I must admit, but you start with a very powerful introduction. You start by talking about Tesla, right, Elon Musk, and the engine and all of that, and they kind of relate that to the human brain. Why is the human brain, Dr. Faber, most of all, that important, right? We see it as a function of the body or an organ of the body, but I don't think a lot of us ascribe that much importance to the human brain. But research has shown that this is probably one of the most powerful machines, really, on Earth, right? Just like you rightly stated in your introduction there. Why is the brain such a powerful organ of the body?
Well, I mean, when you look at the trillions of cells that are in the brain and how they coordinate and create harmony, rhythm, and unity throughout our body, it's a pretty amazing feat when you look at how our heart rate, our blood pressure, our pulse, to what we eat, how much we eat, how fast our muscles move or don't move. It all begins with an area that's not very large, but creates a great deal of significant functioning for life.
Mm-hmm.
So how we think, breathe, decide, feel.
Why this particular connection to the legal system?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. One, this is the first book I've formally written, and I thought, well, who would be a great group to reach out to that wouldn't necessarily be able to afford getting the care their brain really deserves? And I thought, what better group than the people who've had legal problems? I mean, let's face the facts, 85% in jails or prisons have substance abuse problems. There's 7 times higher likelihood of traumatic brain injuries. And yet we, from my perspective, don't rehabilitate the brain as well as rehabilitate other parts of the body. So that's why I wrote it. The book can be purchased at Amazon, but it can also be downloaded free at my website, which is really the way I set up from the beginning. Is the people who need it the most, I wanted them to have it for free.
Absolutely, and that's why I found it really interesting, because oftentimes you think about people who've been in and out of jail. There's so much focus on the behavioral or the moral aspects, right, of what they've done, but very rarely do we hear or do we see that connection or that attempt to figure out if there's anything wrong with the brains. And you mentioned a few of the bad guys, right, that we've known in American history, or really in the world, like Ted Bundy, Bonnie and Clyde. And you write that it's not necessarily that these are bad guys, right? I mean, you make the argument that it's because they're the bad brains that lead, or the bad brains lead to bad behavior. Can you expand on that a little bit for us, Dr. Faber?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, if I could use Dr. Amen's words, verbiage, they're a lot of times they're not bad people. They just have bad brains that lead to bad decisions. And so, you mentioned earlier, Fred, about just the brain and research and knowledge. I mean, the brain's just really starting to catch up. When you look at the heart, the stomach, the kidney, we've had all sorts of different interesting diagnostic tests that have been available for years. And now we're finally coming up with non-invasive or less invasive techniques to look at the brain, understand how it coordinates different circuitry together to make higher constructive choices, and what happens when we don't. And so would it not make sense to take that information and apply it to a system, particularly in this country, where the number of people we have in jails and prisons, it's huge. It's extremely high. So, it's kind of the what if question. What if we were able to come up with a system that were able to cut down our prison sentences or people in prisons by half? What would that do to our economy? What would that do to our GDP? And most importantly, what would it happen to all these people if they really, truly had a change? Not just a pseudo change, but a real change.
Yeah. How successful has neuroscience been in kind of mitigating the stuff? You've been you work in this field, right? I mean, how successful or how challenging has it been, one, for professionals like yourselves, and also for the individuals who I would imagine would have to accept, right, or come to that place of recognition, knowing that there is something internally wrong here that we need to address?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what's going on right now legally, neuroimaging was not really even utilized 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And now it's getting to a place where it's used not to say someone's guilty or innocent, but it's used to help mitigate sentencing. So rather than saying, this is your fourth DUI, you're going to jail for the next year, it's like, this is your fourth DUI. Here's your brain scan. Your basal ganglia, frontal lobes aren't working very well. You need to responsibly start taking care of them. And rather than spending 12 months in a small prison cell, we'll let you go to a good substance abuse program instead, where you're going to dedicate the time, effort, and energy to rehabilitate your brain to get better. Some people will mistake the book initially as sort of a bleeding heart, caring person that just wants to give people a break. And as much as I wish that was possible, healing takes time. I mean, if you break your leg, your femur, it's going to take 6 months for the cast on. Your brain's going to take probably 6 months, if maybe not even longer, to get rehabilitated. And you have to take the steps after you know what's wrong to fix it.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen evidence of this, and I'm sure there are facts that back a lot of your arguments. In your book, you write a story about Eric, if you recall, who found himself constantly in and out of jail, on the wrong side of law, and temper tantrums, fights, and how he was able to transform his life, right, by this very same process. Do you share a little bit about Eric's story and how successful you were able to get him to come out of that situation by just changing the brain?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds sort of like the way maybe the story in the book makes it sounds a little bit more of a fairy tale than it is. But he came in, he didn't want help, he didn't want to get better. The only way he knew to help himself feel better was to use a lot of marijuana and other substances that would calm him. And one is convincing him, hey, there's other things that are safe and that aren't even medications that we can use to get you to be more relaxed. So let's give him a try. And he would try them and they'd work, but then he'd go back and say, well, maybe this didn't work as well as something else I've tried. And so, like anyone in life, you kind of go through this sort of yo-yo effect where people get better, then they go down, and they get better, then they go down. So there was a lot of phone calls between he, particularly his mother, and myself. So it was a fight. A good fight, though. It wasn't like a fight where you're screaming and yelling. It's more of a fight. Well, this is not going to win. You've got a choice here. Either you take the supplements and stay away from people who are using, or you're going to go to a place where you're not going to have anything to take anyhow, and you're going to be around people you probably aren't going to want to spend time. And they'd be arguing and fighting, and part of it just being patient, but most importantly, just persistent, and having a relational style that promotes motivation, and a word we don't like these days very much, but accountability.
Yeah. I mean, if there's one thing, Dr. Faber, I couldn't agree with you more on that one. If there's one thing that you didn't mince words with in the book, was the fact that this is not an easy process. It's not a one and done. It takes a lot of ownership and, like you rightly said, accountability. And I'd imagine this I guess can be applied in every aspect of life, really. Nothing good comes easy, right? We don't try this once and say because it doesn't work, we'll give up. So I think that's really where the challenge is. Now, would it be fair, Dr. Faber, in making the case that there has to be strong desire on the part of the individual to put in the amount of work it takes to get themselves to that position? And how does one find that motivation? I mean, in my work I'm not a doctor, but I realize motivation, like you rightly said, it's almost sounds like a cliche these days, but we all need some level of motivation, right? I mean, to whatever degree we need, it depends on the individual. But how does one get to the point like Eric, who would have to overcome that inertia, right? That cynicism, whatever, opinions of others and experiences, and to keep committing to something that they truly want and desire out of life? I mean, do you find yourself doing a lot of that coaching and doing that motivation as well, in addition to the healing process?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, this is where life hits, and it's, as a physician, we learn about, symptoms. So depression, anxiety, anger, irritability, focus, inertia, amotivation. I mean, I can use all sorts of scientific jargon, but the bottom line is this, is people are people, and they've got hearts, and they've got feelings, and they've got a life, and somehow you as a physician have to engage with them at the level they're at to make a difference. So for me to use a lot of scientific jargon and textbook words, it don't work. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't work. And I'll be quite frank, I've read a lot of psychoanalytic books. I love them. But the two big areas, there's something called motivational interviewing, which is more scientific. But I think just as important are some of the business books. Crucial Accountability by Patterson and Al. Yeah. It's one of the better books on helping people change their destructive behaviors. And so it's a combination, to me, of using great and incredibly powerful scientific research, but then secondarily going to some of the best leadership material you can find and utilizing it. Yeah. Leader, we stay calm and we try to stay more calm or have more composure, but simultaneously we're much more resilient to the waves of the negativity we're going to get. Yeah. And you can help them get through it by you staying calm.
Yeah. One of the staggering statistics that you share in your book is that more than half of people who are incarcerated find themselves, unfortunately, back in that same situation. Why is that?
Well, I mean, there's a couple ways to answer that. I mean, one is just watch a lot of movies when people get out of prison. You know, they open up the fence, they let you out, and where's your friends? Where's the bus? Where's the tram? You know, there's not much of anything there. And so you're left on your own, by yourself, to figure out how to do life where you may have been in a system for the last 5, 15, 20 years. They don't know what to do. You know, they don't know where to go. They don't know how to get a job. They don't know where they're going to get money. And so what happens? People go back to old ways to either get cash or make life work. And unfortunately, for half of them, they make the wrong choices that get them into further trouble. Yeah. And I think some of them, too, it's just that they're so used to the system, they'd rather be back in there than deal with what's ever going on in the real world.
Yeah, and I'd make the argument, Dr. Faber, for someone who comes out and one, there's that record, that blemish, if you will. Yeah. Oftentimes it's hard to find jobs. There's that societal stigma, and so I think I'm not sure that society does a better job in helping assimilate these folks back into the system, right? And so if someone's out and maybe try a couple of times, can get a job, and society labels them, ex-convicts and whatever. Doesn't that make it a lot more easier for them to go back and kind of give up on life altogether? Is there anything that we can do? I know this may not be a question that I expect you to solve, but this is really something for us all, right? To kind of.
Well, it's a good question. Welcome to the internet. I mean, it's like a background check. Pay $20, and in 5 minutes, you'll have a background check of every misdemeanor felony within 15 minutes in every state in the country. And if you're hiring somebody and you see something on the record, I mean, it's almost like a knee-jerk reflex. You're just going to say, well, I've got 5 other candidates. Do I really want this? Probably not. Well, in essence, that person, depending on who he is and his character, he might have, 9 of the 10 attributes that would make you really successful at that particular company. So we got to get better. I think, reputation management would be huge to help these people out. Having somebody on their side that would serve as a liaison to get them back into the community would be extremely important. And then if there's some concerns, you're at a job and the manager or the person in charge has concerns, to talk to the liaison, and say, hey, let's try to make this a win-win situation. Before we cut this person out. I think that would be really helpful. Yeah. As well.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more there. I think as a society, we have, and I'd say we collectively, right? We all have a part to play. There is a, you talk about trust, right? Trust on the part of the ex-convict, trusting someone or putting the trust in someone to kind of help them along the way. But I'd be the first to argue that it's not often easy, right? Because the very same people they are looking to trust let's look at what's happening right now, right? Which we probably don't want to go into so much detail about. But I'd argue that there's really not that much trust, right? I mean, it goes without saying, there's really not a lot of trust in the social, in the legal justice system right now, right? So how does such a person, and again, it's not a question that I expect you to have the answers to, but this is really just to help us all, start thinking about how to kind of help, make this a lot easier, right? In the absence of that trust, how do you navigate that?
The big key word I think right now, and you're going to see it more and more, is adult secure attachments, and there's lots of information coming out about it, and we haven't really thought about it, but it makes so much sense. It's one. There was initially a lot of work done with babies, and you'd see how they kind of connect with their mother. Some mothers were like, trusting and loving, you get a secure attachment. And then other mothers were more anxious, the kids get anxious. Other mothers were detached, and the kids get more avoidant. It's like, okay, interesting. Well, now we're starting to say, well, when you go through that pattern of relating for the next 15 to 20 years of your life, and what does that do to your ability to connect with people on a day-by-day basis? And here's the reality. and this is where the research is great. It's I don't like what the numbers are, but 50% of people in this country grew up with secure attachments, which basically means you had an adult figure, somebody who you trusted, and they added value to you. And what ends up happening is these people, they get back with secure people, attachment, and they both mutually add value to the other. The relationships grow. It's powerful.
Yeah.
It's huge. If you look at data coming out, who's successful, who does well, couples-wise, the ones that have both secure attachments, it's huge. Now, unfortunately, there's this other 50%, and I frankly think it's even probably higher, where people either want to survive growing up because the family, they had to detach, okay? They don't get close to people. They keep their distance. They stay away. And then there's another half that gets really anxious. They freak out when somebody doesn't like them. They get concerned that if somebody says something, they don't do like they want to do. So what happens? You get somebody who's a detached individual. I'm making this story up. You can go all sorts of different ways with this. Who, I'm independent. You got a problem. We got a problem. It's not my problem. It's your problem. I don't have a conflict. Stay away. What's wrong with you? Why are you doing this to me? And then the anxious person, what do? Oh my gosh. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And so they end up, trying to placate, calm the person, which in a lot of cases is if the detached person's doing drugs, well, guess what the anxious person does? Because they want to feel like they're part of the situation. They do the same thing. Now, the problem is when you look at people who are in the system, and there's not studies, but I'm willing to bet that probably 90%, if not higher, are either anxious, they grew up having anxious attachments, or detached attachments, and no one's ever taught them how to deal things differently. Mm-hmm. And somehow, some way, we got to get in there and help teach and show them that, yes, there are ways to have secure attachments with people. I'll give you a case in point. I got a foundation, Faber Youth Foundation. I reach out to inner city kids in LA that are into entertainment, but in terms of leadership skills, they never got trained. And so if you think I'm going to go in there and start talking about dream building, goal setting, purpose, tenacity, no, you got to connect, and they got to trust.
Yeah, reach them where they are. Yeah,
where they're at. And it's like, so how do you do? Then it gets, well, how do you do that? And it's like, 3 of them last year. I just told somebody this story about a month ago. You want to give them like wow experiences, things that they might not necessarily ever think's possible, and then connect with them. So last year I took 3 to the Beverly Hilton, to the Academy Awards, red carpet in it. And these are inner city kids. They sing, they rap, and you get them inside. Now, one of the girls who came with me, I had to go, I had to go through red carpet, get interviewed, people asking all sorts of questions about the foundation. I had this gal, we'll just call her Sandy, that's not a real name, who I said, just stay here, and then we're going to go to the next room. Okay, so she stood there, cameras, the glitz, the glam, it's the whole thing. She's excited, having a great time. Well, to just backtrack, 2 weeks before that, I met some of the kids for lunch at a Mexican restaurant, and they didn't show except for Sandy, and she was telling me as a singer about some producer who she got in this crazy relationship with, and he was very manipulative, and she got kind of sucked in. And so I probably heard more than I thought I was going to hear, but we talked a lot about secure attachments. She talked about the song she was writing about being genuine and being yourself, not catering to other people. So back to the Academy Awards, I had to go to another room to get interviewed, and I said, Sandy, come on up here with me. And so Sandy came up with me, and the person's interviewing me when I'm talking. And I'm telling them about the foundation. I said, I could talk about it, but ask Sandy what she's thought of it. And all of a sudden, Sandy says, well, she goes, I'm having a great time. In fact, I just wrote the song about being genuine, being myself, being real. And I'm hoping to get out in the market. And it's like she's scared to death. She's scared to death up there, but she's loving every second of it. Every second of it. So long story short, she goes through it. I said, I got to go to another room. I come back a half hour later. I go, where's Sandy? And all of a sudden, now she's up by herself on the red carpet. But my point is, this is what we've got to start doing.
Yeah.
We got to connect. We've got to engage. And we've got to help people start to believe that there's things out there they never dreamed they could possibly do. And secure attachments, adding value, is a real powerful way that you have to start doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, connection, and I applaud you. I think you're saying that to kind of, extort, but this is huge, Dr. Faber. I mean, it takes one, right? And I think that's really where the trust in humanity, that faith in humanity. There's all that, the challenge of implicit bias. We look at people and we kind of write them off because of whatever history. But I can't even imagine the amount of positive impact or effect you had on Sandy, right? But to your point, we all have to get out of our comfort zones and start being willing to give people a second chance, right? And I think that's really where the challenge is, right?
It's all about proximity.
Yeah.
Get close.
Yeah.
Get close, and boy, it's amazing how much you learn by getting close to situations.
Yeah. The other part of it, Dr. Faber, that you talk about is the challenge of dealing with the many socioeconomic issues that some of these individuals face, right? Jobs and family background, and I think that underscores the importance of this is really not the faint-hearted. I mean, there's so many other Sandys out there who may not be fortunate enough to come into people and to come into contact with people like you, right? And I think that's really where that self-motivation, right, or drive, if you will, comes in. So for someone who is probably listening to the podcast, who, I need help, I don't have the right people, I can't even trust the system, is there anything they can do by themselves on their own to overcome this challenge? It is a big one.
Yeah, no, I think there's one. Yes, I think there's a bunch you could do. Two, if someone asked me what I would do, this would be my recommendation, is one, and this is probably the hardest, stay away from the TV. The TV is going to teach you a lot about distrust and paranoia. And then two, get a hold of books or tapes or TED broadcasts that talk about particular subjects that really hit your heart. I mean, secure attachments. Go get the book Attached by Levine and Heller. Read it. You can do a test in the first, 2 chapters, and you'll find out what type of attachment style you've got. And you can use that from your heart to start to develop your heart, not just your brain, but your whole being, into something bigger, better, brighter, and more fantastic. You work with John Masco. I've been to John's house. I mean, I'll be honest. This is 25 years ago, and I walked through his house, and he showed us this room, and he had this big cabinet, and he pulled it out. He says, "If I want something on goal setting, here's where I go. This is where I keep everything since age 20 on goal setting, every conference, every seminar." And I'm thinking to myself, I was 42 at the time, what, Lord's name, have I been doing the last 20 years of my life? This is insane. Now, back up now. That's 20 years ago for me. It's like, I need to get my butt in gear. So I've started reading every morning. Read, journal, read, journal, read, journal. I've got probably 1,200 pages of quotes. I've got a right-hand journal, left-hand journal that's been saved for the last 15 years. That's not the big deal. The big deal is, oh my gosh, this is really a lot different than the things I learned in my, for lack of better words, dysfunctional family. Mm-hmm. And this is a lot different than I'm learning on TV. Mm-hmm. And so my point is this, is if someone really wants to take it to another level, they just got to expose themselves to higher thinking. And that's practical and fits where they're at. Yeah. I met 2 kids, gosh, this was about a month ago, and I said, tell me about high school. These are inner city LA kids. And they said, it was a waste of time. I go, really? Why do you say that? It's like for my math class. I go, I didn't learn math at all. And now I'm kicking myself. This kid was 20 years old. And I said, well, why are you kicking yourself? Because I don't even know how to do a checkbook. I'm just sitting there going, you got to be kidding me. I go, why wouldn't a school take higher math skills and then use what I call direct approaches, translatable approaches,
make it applicable.
To say, here's why you need to know these things. And it's not that hard. And I'm not saying all the schools are terrible, because I don't know that. All I'm saying is, for this kid and his experience, I wish there would have been something better for him. Yeah. But then my mind starts thinking, well, what can I do? How can I help this kid do something? Maybe we make a 3-part series and let him be the star on how to do a checkbook. Maybe how to set up a credit card. And then if people sign up, then they can pay him, not me. Put a course online, and then they get excited. That's the kind of stuff I think we got to do to help people get to their next level.
Absolutely. I agree. And I want us to, make some time to go through the 5 life skills that you write about in your book, Escape. We may not be able to go through all those very extensively, but you write about the 5 life skills, right? I mean, the first one, create a daily schedule. I mean, you hear that, create a schedule. How important is it? Can you just talk us through that we're going to go through all these 5 before we end. So really high level here. Why is it important to have a schedule?
Okay, so I'll kind of give you the scientific answer first, and then I'll give you the kind of real life answer. Our brains, if we're not using them fully, go to default mode network. It's a fancy way of saying there's a little area in the front of our brain called the dorsal medial frontal lobe, and an area in the back called the parietal lobe that'll just fire back and forth. We don't use much energy. It's a great energy saving system. The problem is when we do that, our brains go into wandering mode, which is usually negativity mode. And so we start feeling more negative or irritable or frustrated, which isn't so healthy. So a schedule, and it doesn't even have to be that complicated. Break your day into morning, afternoon, and evening, and just do one constructive activity. I mean, COVID's been a good example of this because people, I'm telling you, it's amazing how people's emotionality has changed. But if you just say in the morning, I'm going to read this chapter out of a book and journal. This afternoon, I'm going to Google movies that overcome being lonely, and I'll watch a movie. Tonight, I'm going to meet with my friend Sally by FaceTime and see what's up. So you've got to keep your brain moving. Okay, otherwise it's going to go back to old habit. It's just like if you don't work out at the gym, your muscles get smaller. That's one. The other issues with scheduling is when you write it down, then you mean business. Okay, you write something down, you took the time and energy to look a week ahead, it takes on a lot more credence because you put the time and energy to do it. So that's my answer on scheduling. I mean, the short answer.
I love that. I mean, we often don't hear about the scientific parts. I mean, we think it's really just to help us organize our day, but hearing the scientific answer and the impact it has on our brain, I think it's powerful. Now, the second point you write about, Dr. Faber, is to build a strong network of high quality and sustainable relationships. I mean, I talk to us about that. Why is that important?
Well, I mean, in part of it, we've been talking about that for the last, 30 minutes.
30 minutes, yeah.
It's like when you have people that believe in you, it's powerful.
Yeah.
And until you feel it and know it, it's hard to even explain. You've got to be around individuals who say, have you ever thought of doing this? Have you ever thought of that? You've got this quality or skill. Gosh, you got to think of doing this. Yeah. So it's not that hard, gang. It's really not that hard. It's just, a lot of times doing it. Yeah.
And then the fourth point there is to develop a powerful, resilient self-esteem. I think that's really where the rubber meets the road, right? So all these things are great, but if there is no desire, right, that resiliency, I think that's really where it comes. Or we start and then we run into certain roadblocks or obstacles and we're done. But why is that important? Resilience in the process.
Well, resilience is, this is my definition of resilience. It's one, when you hit an obstacle, having a positive attitude, and two is you ain't giving up. You're not stopping. I don't care who you are in life. I don't care if you're the poorest person who lives on the streets to the wealthiest man in the world. You're going to have problems.
Yeah.
That's life.
Yep.
And so doesn't it make sense to have a bunch of skills to know how to deal with resilience? So when somebody says, you know, you're never going to fail or pass mathematics like these kids, rather than starting to have the negative thoughts and giving up, you come up and say, you know what, I'm going to show this person something. Not only going to pass math, I'm going to go to MIT.
Yeah.
And when I'm done at MIT, I'm going to go back and show them my graduation.
Yeah.
I'll give you a case in point. I wrote a paper in high school, and I grew up playing hockey in Minnesota. That's a whole other story. Some really cool stories, but I didn't have time to write one of these papers. My mom typed it, and this teacher made a complete fool out of me in front of the whole class. Said I'd never become any kind of writer. It made me look really stupid. And my first thought is, you know what? You are going to eat every word you've just put in your mouth. And you can be rest assured, when Escape was written, guess who got a copy of the book? That English teacher who told me I could never write. But that's resilience. It's like people say you can't do it. Well, you do it, and then you put it about 5 notches higher. But you got to have people that can help you.
I love that you bring that personal story into that there, right, Dr. Faber. Like, oftentimes, we hear from, the experts, who come in, and tell us all the great things that we need to do. But hearing you walk through, and I'm going to dwell on that here for a little bit before we go to the last two. But you talk about this, for instance, like the teacher who told you couldn't write. But any other examples of personal struggles? I'm sure there's plenty, right? That you had to overcome to bring you where you are today. I think it's important for our listeners to realize that these are all people who've been through, who've had life happen to them, right? But the ability to overcome it. I think it's important.
And it's scary. Well, when I was a junior in high school, I played football and ice hockey, and I hurt my back in football, and they thought I slipped a disc, and I couldn't play hockey that year at all. I had to go to the hospital. The doctors wanted to do surgery. They kept me in these weights. And as soon as I heard surgery, I told my mom and dad, pack the bags. We're going home. We ain't doing surgery. Thank you very much. I don't know. And I was scared. Okay. And so I couldn't play hockey that year at all. And as far as I'm concerned, I couldn't play hockey. I was get out of school early, go to college. But I watched one team, and they had a couple kids who were incredible players. And I said, you know what? We can beat those guys next year. And I was kind of an average player. I said, I know we can beat those guys. So I got really excited. So I started running, lifting weights, working out harder. Came time to try out for the team. Now, in Minnesota, it's like you have 200 kids trying out for 20 spots on a high school team. I'm scared to death. I was hoping I'd at least get to do a couple shifts maybe on the varsity for the year. Well, long story short, I made the varsity team. And one of the coaches said to me, he says, after about the second game, he says, you're like an all-conference hockey player. I'm thinking to myself, I am? Because really all I thought of is just to make every kid on that team better so we could go to the state high school tournament. And although we never made it to the high school tournament, I was first team all-conference hockey player, which means not only did I get a reward, but I got a scholarship for college. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. Who would have ever dreamed that? And so that took it to a whole other level. But to make it even bigger, it's like the best story came 5 years later, because 5 of the kids I grew up playing with, they played on another team. And that was called the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. Who, they won the gold medal against the Russians. And it's still pretty emotional, because you can't believe you're playing against kids like that. Yeah. And today, some 40 years later, when you see Disney still making movies about that experience, and all I can do is go back and say, you know what, is if you've got a big enough dream and enough resilience to fight, it's amazing to see what you can do.
Wow.
And if we could somehow, what if schools taught, besides reading, writing, arithmetic, what if they taught, what's your passion? And we're going to teach you resilience. Yeah. We're going to teach you, people say you can't do this. Your mom or dad might say you can't do this. Yeah. Your best friends say you can't do this. Yeah. You're going to walk on the streets and people say you can't do this. Yeah. And you're going to look in their eyes. You're not going to say a goddamn thing. But internally you say,
yes,
watch, wait, and see.
Love it.
And 15 years later, you'll have some good stories.
Love it. Love it. Love it. The fourth point, staying sober.
Yeah, so this is like for this country, it's like we kind of say it's not that big of a deal. But alcohol and now marijuana, the THC in marijuana. I mean, the kids are all telling me now it's a plant. The government finally woke up, and I'm like, listen, if you look at the information on THC in your brain, it is not good. But here's the scoop: is 85% of the people that are in the system, it's because of drugs and alcohol. So just from a common sense standpoint, it'd probably be a good idea to stay away, because if your reward systems, we don't know everything about a reward system, but more than likely people with substance use issues, it takes a lot more to make them happy, and that's a shortcut. So we just got to help you find other ways to get you happy too. Is in terms of focus, memory, being at your best. You can't do it. I mean, as a doctor, just give me a case in point. I mean, I'm up at 5 a.m. reading. And if I'm up till 2 a.m, hanging out with all the friends doing their stuff, it's just like you can't be at that peak level. So you can find other ways to have fun, because you still got to have fun. You just got to be creative about it.
Absolutely. And the very last point here, which we've talked about, I guess, several times already, to develop and grow. How does that help the brain?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the thing that's amazing is, one, you stay younger. That if you think about it, kind of makes sense, because when you learn new information, you take in new pieces of information, all those neurons and axons have to make other connections to make it work. And I don't know why, I don't know how, but physically people, this is the opinion because I don't have any data to back it up, they tend to stay more vibrant and youthful. And I'll give a case with music. I've got friends, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I grew up in the 70s, so, bands that were heavy rock, Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, the songs were like really cool and great. But the people who are still listening to the music, they haven't allowed their neurons to develop. So if you continue to kind of grow and develop, like one thing is, hip hop or EDM music, I'm not saying you have to like it or agree with it all, but you help your brain continue to stay up with what's trendy and cultural and cool, whether it be in music or movies or arts or leadership or learning. The more you can stay contemporary, the more youthful you're going to be, and plus you're going to enjoy life a whole lot more too.
Yeah. Even though you didn't cover this, spirituality, right? I mean, spirituality. I'm a faith person, and I find that to be very powerful for the mind, right? I mean, the Bible talks about it. Kind of things you focus on. Is that does it have any impact at all?
If I ever have I'm working on another book right now, but the spirituality piece and secure attachment with your creator, you won't forget it. Yeah. If you have a secure attachment with a power that's way bigger than you, you won't forget it. I guarantee you. Again, this is what gets fascinating, because there's people with insecure attachments and anxious attachments, and how does that all play into spirituality? Because it does, and that's a little bit of talking. But the more you can have that, 24/7, to have that kind of internal connection with something far bigger and better than we are, it's huge. So absolutely.
I'm glad you touched on that, because I know there are listeners who have that spiritual connection as well. But as we wrap this up here, Dr. Faber, I want you to have that last word. There's probably someone listening or watching, depending on whether watching from who may be stuck. Dr. Faber, how find themselves stuck, whether it's a physical jail cell or a mental jail cell, or whatever situation they may be in. Maybe there's no one to trust. Maybe they've tried a couple of times, they've failed, and there's just, there's that desire to move on. Any words of encouragement as we bring this to a close here that, I know your book's we're going to have that title. Definitely go out there and check out Dr. Faber's book, Escape. But I believe as well, escape is not only, out of a physical jail cell, right? Even though that's really what the bulk of it is. But what would you say to that person right now, Dr. Faber?
I would say this is, as long as you're willing to come up with an idea that's bigger than you, and you're willing to learn about resilience, I think there's a lot of hope. And the resources, and believe it or not, the people are out there. You just have to look. So I'm going to encourage and implore that, as negative as the world seems right now, see it as a challenge. Look it square in the eye. Don't give up. And let Fred and me look back 15, 20 years from now. You can look us up and say, you know what? Look at me now.
Yeah.
And I think we'll both be really excited for whoever you are out there.
Wow. Dr. Faber, thank you so much for coming on the Time with Fred podcast and sharing these powerful nuggets. And if you're out there and you're listening to this podcast or you're watching, check out the book, Escape, Rehab Your Brain to Stay Out of the Legal System. Not only out of it wasn't written just for ex-convicts, but these are powerful life lessons that we all can take advantage from. And if you go on Dr. Faber's website, it's going to be on your screen. You can download this book. I mean, he's giving this out there. It's not a money-making thing. You can tell from his heart that he's genuinely out there to help. So definitely check it out. Dr. Faber, thank you so much for coming on the Time with Fred podcast. We really appreciate you and all you're doing to help humanity.
Thank you for having me, Fred. It was a good hour. I appreciate it.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you.